All right. What's up, everyone? Thank you so much for coming out. Welcome to HackDavis's first workshop in our series on building the basics. If you're here for the Build Your Personal Website workshop, you're in the right place. And if at any time this thing cuts out or gets too loud or too quiet, just shout, let me know. But quick little introduction. Obviously, we're HackDavis. My name is Omid. I'm the co-president of HackDavis. I'm also the lead for our technical team. So anything that you see us produce technically, like our website, mobile apps, application websites, stuff like that, that's our team. That's us doing it. And I also got Trishna here with me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Trishna. I'm a second-year CS major, and I'm part of the technical team. I joined the team towards the end of my freshman year, and I can say that it has been one of the best learning experiences so far. And I'm so happy you guys are with us for our first event. So can I have a round of applause, please? Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So before we begin, some quick little introductory stuff. If you're coding along with us, I'd ask that you all please head over to that first link. It's sublimetext.com, and give that a quick download. If you're not coding along with us, that's perfectly fine. This code will be up on GitHub, so you can access it at any time that you like. And this is also being recorded, so this will be uploaded to our HackDavis YouTube channel. What Sublime Text is, it's basically a very lightweight IDE. I know that there's a lot out there that people like to use, like Eclipse, Visual Studio Code. Some people might not even know what an IDE is. It's basically a text editor, very fast, very lightweight, very quick to download, very easy to use. And we'll just be using that for the sake of getting things done quick in today's workshop. I also ask that everyone please signs in at that URL right there, tinyurl.com/hdworkshop1. You can also scan that QR code. That will add you all to our mailing list so that you can get information and updates whenever new workshops or our event comes out, as well as you will be entered into an Amazon gift card raffle. Cool stuff. All right, so while that downloads, we do want to do a quick little introduction to what HackDavis is, because we are aware that many people have no idea what this really even is. So HackDavis is UC Davis's premier collegiate hackathon, and we're dedicated to making the world a better place through our emphasis on building projects for social good. So if you aren't aware what a hackathon is, for us, it's a 36-hour event that takes place in the middle of April, where we have teams from size anywhere from 1 to 4 who all work on technical projects trying to better the world in some way by creating a project that has an emphasis on social good. And that does sound kind of intimidating, and like you might need like tons of technical experience to build some big project, but HackDavis is actually very welcoming, and we welcome students from all majors and all experience levels. Our main goal is to be here to empower student hackers to collaborate, learn technological skills, and build impactful projects. We're not just for experienced people who already know what they're doing. Now, you also might be wondering what social good means, because that's a pretty broad term. Our core concept of social good is that you're building a project that benefits the community and others beyond just yourself. We want hackers to be working to build solutions with the specific goal of helping others and their community, not just themselves. And we also give participants the opportunity to be able to work with nonprofits and major companies throughout the industry. We'll name drop a few in a sec, but this gives us feedback to the hackers directly and helps to stimulate their creativity with the projects that they're building for social good. So a few of those that we'd like to name drop. Some of the companies that routinely like to come out to HackDavis, whether it be recruiters or technical members alike to come and help hackers. We got Google Cloud, Amazon, IBM, Contrary, Ford. You might have heard of a few of those. We also have some really great nonprofits who we work with, like Habitat for Humanity and Breathe California. We also have some really nice recognition throughout industry. You guys might recognize that man up there. His name is Craig Federighi. He is the #2 at Apple. You might have seen him in some of Apple's keynotes. He actually pulled up to HackDavis's virtual event last year, so that was pretty cool. And just in case you're curious how big HackDavis is, last year, where we were fully online, but this year we do plan to be fully in person, we had over 770 hackers and over 150 total projects submitted. And 40% of all of our hackers, this was their first ever hackathon. And 37% of our hackers were female or non-binary. We also gave out more than 15K in prizes. So if you're trying to win something, there's some pretty good stuff there to win. Now, lastly, before we actually hop into the workshop itself, I'd just like to give a quick little 1.5 minute long video, sort of recapping what our event looked like in the past. This is great. I'm aware that the audio did not work, my bad. But anyways, let's hop into the actual workshop itself. So as you can see up here, these are some of the goals that we plan on teaching to you guys today. If all of this looks like French, you're in the right place. As we've tried to market before, this is a beginner-friendly workshop. You do not even need any coding experience at all to be able to come to this and try to take something out of it. And along the way of picking up some of these skills and knowledge points, we also plan on helping you guys build your first personal website. So that should be pretty cool, which is why we're asking you guys to code along with us. So without further ado, let's hop into the basics of HTML, and I'll pass things off to Trishna.
Okay, so let's start off with our first goal of the workshop, which is HTML. So HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language, is a standard language for creating web pages. So what HTML does is create a bare bone or skeleton of the web page. It just gets the content of the page on your web page. And it works on the functional aspect of the working of your website. It doesn't cover making anything look pretty. So to create an HTML file, all you need is a text file with a .html extension. And just like any other file in your file explorer, you just have to double click it for it to open. Unlike other programming languages like Python or C++, HTML doesn't require an extra additional compiling step. So all you have to do is double click it and it runs. HTML is a super flexible language, so even if you do make a syntax error, it will still run. So as you can see on the screen, this is a basic HTML language syntax. It uses elements that are wrapped in an opening and closing tag. So you can see some basic tags on the screen. There's an HTML tag, head tag, title, and body tag, and this basically is all you need to start up your first HTML page.
All right, let's get started with a little bit of coding. So this is going to be interactive, so we are going to be hopping back and forth between the slides and some coding. If at any point you guys feel like you might fall behind, or you might be unsure of what's going on, or you just get kind of lost, feel free to shout a question out. I might have to stop taking them after a certain point just because of time constraints. But we also got Justin and Alex, two of the members of our technical team back there, waving their hands. If you guys do have like a specific code question related to your computer, feel free to raise your hand and they'll come running by. They're super knowledgeable. Hopefully all will be good. Otherwise, let's hop into the actual code. So I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to start yelling. All right, so first thing that we want to do is you're going to need to create an actual HTML file. Now, like Trishna mentioned, an HTML file, it's literally just a text file with the .html extension. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do is just head over to any place that you want, your desktop, documents, download, and just create a file. You can call it anything you want, just put the .html at the end of it, okay? Now, once you've done that, open up Sublime Text. Hopefully everyone was able to get this downloaded. For anyone who came in late, if you guys already have an IDE, feel free to use that. But we are using one called Sublime Text. It's a very quick download. You can find it at sublimetext.com. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into Sublime Text. You're just going to want to click this little file thing up here. Sorry, it's kind of hard to see. Then click Open, then find your file, and you should have a blank HTML file like this. All right. So now that we're in here, we're going to start writing a very, very basic web page. A lot of this won't make sense at first. No worries. We'll come back around and make sure that we can explain everything in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a less than sign. You guys might have seen this from like your math classes. We call this the opening to the bracket, basically, inside of HTML. So I'm just going to do that less than sign. Then I'm going to type HTML. Then I'm going to press enter. And this is the really cool thing about Sublime Text is that it auto-completes and it makes us this really cool looking thing. If you're not using Sublime Text, I'll give you guys a few seconds to copy that down. And again, we'll kind of circle back around and explain what everything is that's here. But for right now, inside of this title tag, I just want you guys to type your name. And inside of this body tag, just type something random. I'll just say content goes here. OK? So once you get all of this, you're going to want to save this file. OK? And like Trishna mentioned, viewing your HTML file, very easy. There's no compile step, anything like that, that you have to actually download. Once you have this text written and the file is saved, you just double click on it. So anywhere it's located, like your desktop downloads, just double click on it, and it should open in your default browser. So mine is Chrome. I'll hop to it in just a second because I still see some people typing down, but you will actually see a real web page load up. Or why is this here? OK. Sick. All right, so once you got this thing copied down, click on that file, and you should see it pull up in your Chrome. And you should see very smallly in the top left something that says content goes here, or whatever it is that you wrote inside of those bottom two tags. And just like that, we have our own website. Albeit this is a pretty bad-looking website, so we're going to try to make it look better. But we do have a functional website. This is something that you could really host and put out there on the web. This is seriously all that you need. Now, let's try to circle back a little bit and actually walk through some of these concepts.
OK, so moving on, we have an HTML element. So an HTML element is a component of an HTML document. It is characterized by a starting tag, some content in between, and an ending tag. So in the previous slide, you must have seen some of the HTML elements were HTML, head, title, and body. Some of the other commonly used tags are the p tag and the div tag. And right over here, you can see an h1 tag and an img tag. Now, there are basically three kind of HTML elements that you can use. One is an HTML tag that contains other HTML tags within it. So as you can see on the screen, there's a body tag. So the body itself is an element that contains other elements inside it. The second type is just a plain element, like the h1 tag and the p tag, that has a starting tag, some content in it, and an ending tag. Lastly, we have something called a self-closing tag, which is a single tag that acts as both an opening and a closing tag. So you can see the img tag over there, which is basically used to attach an image. And you can see that it's just one tag. Another part of an element is an attribute. An attribute is used to add extra properties to your tag. So over here, you can see src, which is an attribute. And src basically adds a path name of your image tag. So that's it about HTML elements. Let's move on. OK. So the first main section that you see in your HTML code is the head tag. So the head element is a container for metadata. Metadata is basically data that is used to describe other data in your HTML document, and it is placed before the body tag. Some of the common tags that you see in your head tag is a title tag, a style tag, and a script tag. Title tag is the metadata which, as the word implies, gives a title to your web page. So when you open a new tab, you see something written on top. That is the title of your web page. Next, we have the style tag. Now, style tag is used to link your CSS file to your HTML file. So while HTML creates a skeleton base of the content of your website and just includes the basic functions of your website, the CSS file is where you add style to these elements. And it is what actually creates the magic. Next, we have the script tag, which links your JavaScript file to your HTML tag. And JavaScript basically adds the backend things to your web page. It is what makes your web page more interactive. And more about our JavaScript in our upcoming workshops, so keep an eye out for that. Coming to the main section of your HTML code, we are at the body tag. So the body tag contains literally everything on your website. It contains all the content, text, headings, paragraphs, images, etc. So the most commonly used tags here are the div tag, header tags, p tag, image tag, and a tag. And these are just the basic tags. We use a lot more in our body tag. OK, so first is the div tag. And this is one of the most important tags that you would use while creating a web page. This is because it groups together multiple tags and is used for sectioning purposes for your web page. You use div tag to make adding CSS to your file more easy. It is also used to organize your web page better, so it's more clearer to see what section of your code gets what kind of CSS styling. Next, we have the header tags, which is H1 to H6. H1 has the largest size font, while H6 has the smallest size font, so you can use that for styling things on your web page. We have the p tag, which is basically the paragraph tag, and it is used for smaller paragraph size tags. The img tag is the image tag, how we saw in the previous slides, and a tag is used for adding links to your web page. Now, Umid will give you a quick demonstration.
All right, let's get back to the code. Back to the code. All right. So now we're going to work a little bit inside of the body. Obviously, we have a web page, but we need to get some stuff on top of it. So we're going to start putting some of those tags that Trishna just talked about actually into action. So let's erase that text that you guys had going there before, and let's put in a new line, and let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to try going after is an H1 tag. So not an emoji. So again, just do the less than H1. If you're working on Sublime, you can just press Enter, and it will auto-complete the closing. If you're not, you can just type it out, not a big deal. But again, the point of this is that you have the opening on the left saying, hey, everything inside of this is an H1. Everything after that closing with the slash right there is no longer an H1. So now inside of here, I'm just going to type my name. I'm just going to say Omid Moghasemi. Don't worry, this will make sense once we get to the finished website exactly why I'm typing it out this way. And then let's try to compare the header tags. Let's maybe type an H2 now instead. And let's say, hi, I'm Omid. Welcome to my personal website. And now if we save this file, we can actually go back to Chrome and we can just press the refresh button and we'll see that that code that I just wrote just came up there. Now I'm going to go back to the code so that you guys can copy that down in case you're still writing. But you should hopefully see on your own computer that the H1 text is slightly larger than the H2. So even though all of these H tags are all header tags, there's a difference in the order. So from 1 to 6, the text, the font size gets slightly smaller. It's just a useful way to be able to easily switch through header font sizes. Now, next up beneath this, let's say on my personal website, I maybe want to display some projects, right? So maybe I want to use like another H2 header to signify that I want to talk about my projects. So I'll say like projects right down here, right? And then maybe beneath that, I need like an image of one of my projects to display, right? So I'm going to type it out like this. And then this might look a little bit weird. Don't worry, we'll come back to what exactly is going on inside that image tag. And then let's say beneath that, I also want to describe my project. But I don't want to use the header because that's really big. I need some smaller text more built for a paragraph. So we can use the P tag, which conveniently stands for paragraph. And then I can just say work in progress. Now, that's a lot, so I'll give you guys a few seconds to copy that down. But if you actually go over to the Chrome page and refresh it, you'll see that all this text now shows up with its varying different font sizes. You won't see the image yet because we haven't loaded anything in, but all of the text will show up. So now let's talk really quickly about this image. So like Trishna mentioned, the image is a bit different. It's a self-closing tag because it doesn't really have any content. It's just one image. But you link that image by putting it inside of these quotes next to source. Source, this isn't the best way of describing it, but it's basically like a parameter being passed to the image tag, saying like, hey, where should I look for the source image that should be displayed? You can actually put in the path to a file here. So like if you guys are experienced with Unix and you've ever used like the cd command, you can put in that path directly into that quote and it will know how to handle it. but you can also just embed a link directly. So if we actually hop over to Chrome and we just go like straight to Google, we can actually just look up like computer science images, and we can literally like go to Google, and we could right click on an image. So I don't know, this one looks interesting. We can click on it, and then if you click on copy image address, this will give you the address just to the image itself, and you'll know that you have the right thing if you paste it into your browser and you just get like the image on a black background. So just find any image like that. You can use anything that you want. Just find something on the web. Once you do, literally all that you have to do is paste it inside of the, okay, that's a really long link. We will not be using that one. But you just have to paste the link inside of those quotes, and it'll show up. Let me find one that is not as long. Okay, I think this one's good. Bruh. One sec. Okay, this right here. Yo. All right, we got him. All right, so now that you guys hopefully have an image link pasted into there, again, save your HTML file, head back to Google, close that tab, and then if we refresh our page right here, you'll actually see the image show up. This one's a bit big. During the break, I'll work on finding one that's a little bit more reasonably sized, but try to find one that fits somewhat within the aspect ratio of your browser. There's ways to size it down, but we won't be going over that since it's a bit advanced, so just try to find one that fits. But otherwise, this is the basics of an HTML page. And honestly, this is a pretty decent website as it is with just these few tags. Obviously, this looks pretty ugly, but we're going to go over some CSS now to kind of try and find a way to pretty this up. But before we get to that, I do want to introduce one thing. So Trishna was talking about the div tag and saying that it's one of the most important tags because it makes it very easy to apply CSS styles. And we'll get into CSS in a second. But I just want to show you guys really quickly what happens when you put something like this inside of a div. So let's say that I want to put my h1 tag right here on line 8 with my name inside of a div. If I go back to Google Chrome here for a second and I refresh, you'll notice that the page actually doesn't change. So div is a bit weird. It's one of the elements that does not actually apply any changes to the page itself, which is why nothing changed. But it will be super useful once we start doing CSS because it'll make it easy to apply it to everything inside of the div. And if that sounds confusing, don't worry, we'll get back to that in a second. But this is where we're at right now. We're going to go ahead and take a quick 3 to 5 minute break, just let everyone stretch, kind of wrap their minds around this. Before we go there, does anyone have any big conceptual questions at all? Anything that they're confused about, want me to go back, show some old code, anything like that? Cool, cool. Right now it is 7:27. I'll meet you guys back at 7:32. Feel free to take a break, stretch, ask Alex or Justin any questions. If you guys also need any help, feel free to come up here, and I'm more than happy to help as well. Yeah, it's fine. No music. Yeah, it's fine. All good. Okay, I need this image sucks. When I did a practice one earlier today, I found like a good image on like the first try. This is whack. Yo. Oh, I can't be in full screen.
How did you remove it from that screen and put it on this screen?
Oh, you can like drag to like take it. Oh. This acts as like a second monitor, but it's like captured up there. It just sucks because this is like so small. I like can't read the code. But all good, all good. Okay, please.
There's a
no,
camera?
No.
Oh my god, it's just my photo with the camera.
Yeah, I'm recording. I feel like this recording is not going to be quality. Nice, it didn't copy. I hate it here. Please give me. Okay, solid looking image. Bruh. Ah, okay, this will work. Nice, okay. Also, so after you do this first slide and you read it, can you like drag this up all the way so I can see like the code snippets? Cool, thank you.
There's only one here.
Yeah, for the very last one,
Okay, yeah.
there's gonna be like a lot of code.
Right, yeah.
It will be packed.
Yeah, I'll be doing this and then like it'll be all good. So that's
Yes. Yeah. Okay, let me drag this back over. I want to split screen this, but I also like, I literally like will not be able to read it.
Is there no way to connect it to this? Because this is pretty big.
Unfortunately,
I mean,
no.
I don't think now,
Yeah. I'm like not gonna be able to like code on this. Like this. Okay, wait. Let me. Okay, that's actually solid. That's doable. All right, solid. Back to here.
Did you guys come here in time?
Yeah, there was a lady with her with like her lecture. There was like 2 people standing here. She like didn't move until like 6:45. Very annoying, but it is what it is.
I have literally never cycled this fast in my life.
You what?
I never cycled this fast in my life.
Did you have a class right before this?
No, I actually had a submission due, like an assignment due, and then I realized like I had one question wrong, so I was like,
shoot.
redoing the whole thing. But that.
Hello.
I'm worried about walking around with this smash.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, you could also keep it.
Yeah. All right, we'll go like 30 seconds. If you want to talk, you can just go straight into the CSS slide.
Do I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So if everyone's done with their HTML, let's move on to the second half of the workshop. Okay, so this is the fun part of the workshop. We're going to talk about CSS. So CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets, is the language used to style an HTML document. This is used to manipulate the layout, styling, and positioning of various elements on the page. It's a really powerful, fun, and interactive tool that can transform a really raw and boring-looking HTML page into something grand, modern-looking, or just a simple, plain website. You can add your own styling and designing to it and really make it your own. So just like the HTML file, all that you need to create a CSS file is a text file, but with a .css extension. And you must remember that to view your CSS file's effect, you have to include it into your HTML file. So if you guys were paying attention in the first half of the workshop, can anyone in the audience tell me what tag must we use to link our CSS file to the HTML file? Just shout it out.
Style.
Yeah, thank you. So it's the style tag. Now, CSS, the syntax for CSS is pretty easy to understand. As you can see on the screen, we have a .first class, which is a selector. So a selector is used to identify sections of code They contain HTML elements onto which your CSS styling will be applied to, and you'll understand that just in a bit. Color over here is the property, and purple is the value, which is pretty self-explanatory. Anything inside the .first class will have a color of purple. So that's the basics of CSS, and now Amit will show you a quick demo.
All right. Let's head back really quickly to our code over here. Give me one sec, folks. All right. So back at our code now. I swapped out the image. Everything else looks the same. So if you guys want to create a CSS file now, it's going to be the exact same process as an HTML file. Literally just a text file except .css as the extension. Call it anything that you want. Feel free to put it anywhere. Well, actually, put it in the same directory as your HTML file. You can put it in different directories, but let's not complicate things. So if your HTML file is in the desktop, put your CSS file there, and so on and so forth. And then once you got that CSS file, open it up in Sublime Text. You should see an empty file like this next to your HTML one at the very top left. And then once you got that in here, we can actually start writing our first CSS code. So I am literally just going to copy what we had up there on the slideshow for right now. We're just going to keep it very, very simple. I'm going to call my thing first class right here. And then I'm just going to put the property. So my property is going to be color. And then in here, I'm just going to put purple. So CSS, it's super smart. It can actually recognize the exact color that you're putting in. There's a few different ways to put in a color in CSS. If you guys are familiar with hex codes or RGB, you can use either of those methods. No worries if you're not. But you can also just give a literal color name, and it will know how to map it. So now that I have this class with the color purple, you'll notice if I refresh my HTML file, nothing actually happened. And that's because, as Trishna mentioned, I need to actually link it. So if we come back to our HTML code right here, right underneath this title, I can actually create a link tag. Or I can, OK. And then this link tag, again, well, sorry, it should be self-closing. So inside of this self-closing link tag right here, we're going to put the same properties that we showed very earlier on inside of this slideshow. So we're going to do rel equals style sheet. And then we're going to say href is equal to the location of our file. So just like with Unix, where we were talking about before, you're just putting in the relative file path. So hopefully you put it in the same directory. If you did, just do // and then the name of that file. So my file is called workshop.css, and just put that in. And you need to put the .css. Now this rel equals style sheet, don't worry too much about that. Basically, it just says that this is a style sheet, so process it as such. A style sheet is like CSS code inside of a file, basically. Trishna was talking about the style tag. I use the link tag. It's actually very similar. I just use this to show you guys that there are other options. There's not just the style tag, because there's multiple ways to do things. But now if I refresh my HTML code again, still nothing's happened. And that's because we need to actually apply this CSS class that we just created to a piece of HTML code. So I called mine first class. Whatever you called it, copy that value. And then now come over here to your code. So my h1 tag, I want to put that color onto my h1 tag. So sort of like that parameter with image where we said source is equal to something, I'm going to say class is equal to something. And again, just inside of quotes, I'm literally just going to paste first class right in there. Okay? So whatever your name is, just paste it right inside of there. And now, just like that, we got some purple text in the top left. Now, I'll slow down. I'll give everyone a second to copy that. But again, it's just a fairly straightforward process. You have to link your style sheet. So whatever file it is, workshop.css. If you have multiple, you can link multiple of them too. It works just fine that way. And then to be able to attach it to an actual tag, you have to go to the opening bracket and then write class is equal to quotes. And then inside of that quote, just put your class name. And if you're curious about the definition of a class, I'll get to that in a sec. And again, this is what the class looks like. Just the dot, the name, open brackets, and then the attribute color, and then the value, purple. Awesome. Hopefully everyone has got that. So now we will hop back to our slideshow right here. And I will turn this mic back on. All right. So what I was just talking about, how we actually apply CSS. So I was showing you guys how to apply a class, right? Like I just wrote the word class is equal to, and I used the dot to signify that I was making a class in CSS. But there's actually other ways to apply CSS. So there's 3 different ways: classes, IDs, and inline. So I could spend a lot of time talking about this. It's a little bit in-depth of a subject, but basically a class is just a bunch of CSS attributes bundled together that can be applied to any number of HTML elements. So that class that we just created that I called first class, we could have put that on every single tag inside of there. So the H2, the div, everything could have taken that and it would have worked just fine. IDs, however, are the exact same thing as classes, except they can only be applied to one HTML element. That's sort of its breaking rule. And as you can see right here, we use this pound sign instead of the dot to signify an ID. And then right below that is inline. So I don't have a code sample of this, mainly because I don't want you guys to use inline CSS. It's not a great practice. And while it works just fine, there's sort of some downfalls that are kind of unforeseen that you'll learn about as you get more experience. It's really just not a great way to apply CSS, but basically it involves going directly into your HTML itself and just coding the CSS right in there. There's a certain syntax to allow for that. Would not recommend using it. Use classes or IDs, because the bigger that your code gets, it's just so much easier to understand what's going on when they're in separate files. All right, so let's move on to some of the common CSS attributes. So you guys just saw us using one, color. So again, all of these are just whatever this word is up here on the left, and then on the right, some value. So for color, again, there was a few different ways to do it, and all that it does is it changes the color of text. If you want to change the background color of a container or like a box or something like that, there's background color, and it takes the exact type of values in. Some other really common ones that you might run into or might need are things like the ability to align text or images. Text align will take care of that for you. There's also font family if you want to change the font of text. And there's also height and width if you want to make like a box or a container much taller, much shorter. You can also apply that directly onto images as well. Now, obviously, these are not the only CSS attributes. There's hundreds out there. These are some of the most common ones, but the way that I would personally recommend figuring out like what CSS attribute you need is just thinking like in real terms, like, okay, what do I need to do to this element? And then just looking that up. There's a ton of great websites out there. Personally, W3 Schools I think is probably the best for like basic level CSS stuff. If you ever really need an attribute, they actually have a really long list that just lists out the names. The names are fairly self-explanatory, like font family, height, width. They all kind of imply what they do. I would highly recommend just looking at that list and kind of figuring out what you need when you're on the go. Now, lastly, from a conceptual perspective, before we start coding again, let's talk about positioning and spacing. So this is one of the hardest topics to talk about because we could have like a whole presentation on this. It gets super in-depth. But the basic concept is that if you want to add spacing between elements, one good way to do it is with the margin, border, and padding. Now, this isn't the best thing for spacing, but it's a way to kind of work around and just get some moderate spacing going inside of your projects. So these are 3 different fields, all in CSS, and they all apply in different ways to the content that you create. So what we see right here is actually something called the box model. If you look this up, there's a ton of articles about this if you're curious to know more. But basically what's going on, let's imagine that this is an H1 tag, for example, right? So our content is the actual H1, it's our text that says my name, Moby Mosa. Now there's 3 sort of boxes that surround that text that are invisible to you when you just use a default H1 tag. There's first of all something called padding. So padding is the closest thing to the content, and it actually inherits some of its properties. So if you apply a background color to your H1 text, it'll actually go directly to the padding itself. Now the border is sort of like a break between the padding and the margin field. So this is fairly self-explanatory. It's literally just a border. Like for example, if you guys want to try coding one out right now, if you just say border 2 pixels solid red, you will have like a 2 pixel long solid red border, just a border. And then margin is another way to add spacing. It's like padding in a sense, except it does not inherit any properties of the content. If you're looking to literally just add like white space between 2 elements, margin can get that job done for you. All right, so now we are going to get into some coding. We're going to write some CSS out and sort of flesh this website out. Any questions about the box model, anything up here that I just talked about? Because that was a pretty long rant. Yes.
The website you mentioned for learning CSS?
W3 schools.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right, to the code we go. So let's head back here. Okay. So our website, it's in a pretty good state from a content perspective, but it doesn't look very pretty right now. So if we hop over to our CSS file, there's a few things that I want to do first. So I don't want my name to be purple. I'm just going to delete that line and get rid of it. We're going to first mess around with that padding thing a little bit. So when it comes to padding and margin are actually a little bit difficult to code out. If you want, you can just say like padding is equal to 4 rem. I'll explain what rem means in a second. And if you refresh your page right here, you'll see that there's padding added in all 4 directions. But that's not very user-friendly, because what if you only want it to apply to like 1, 2, or 3 sides? There's actually quite a few ways to do it. Again, if you want to learn all of them, W3 schools would highly recommend. However, if I just want to add it to like 1 or 2 sides, autofill can actually help us here. If I put padding dash, we can see that I can actually individually add it to all 4 sides. So I think that I want my name to be a part of like a nav bar per se. So I want to do padding left because I don't want my thing to go right up against the left edge of the website. So let's do 1 rem for right now. And then I also don't want to go right up against like the text right beneath me. So let's say like padding bottom 1 rem as well. And let's also say padding top as well. But I don't want any padding right, so I'm not going to do that padding variable. Now if we refresh right here, we'll see we got padding on the left, right, and top. You can't tell that there's nothing on the right because there's no content there, but trust me, there's nothing there. Now, if you're wondering what this rem is, let me take a moment to explain this. So in CSS, this is unfortunate because it's a bit confusing. There's a few different ways to define pixel values. So if you guys have ever seen CSS written before, you've probably seen something like 16 pixels, right? Where if you want to define the length of some value, you typically use pixels abbreviated as px, right? So just your number, then px, that's a pixel value. But the issue with pixels is that they're not great for accessibility. So a lot of modern day guides that you might look at, they won't just use the px. If you want to read more about that, feel free, but that's the basic reason, not great for accessibility. So nowadays, there's 2 other ways to do it. You might see one called EM. I'm not going to show that off, but just know that it exists. It's not very common. But the other one that's starting to gain a lot more popularity because it's very accessibility friendly is REM. Now, I want to show you guys something. If I put 16 pixels as my top padding, you'll notice nothing changed, actually. And I'll explain why in a second, but not that much space. If I put 16 REM and I refresh right here, a ton of space. And that's because REM actually maps to pixel values. So on most computers, 1 REM equals 16 pixels. But the reason why it's better for things like accessibility is because it goes to your computer's native font. So let's say you have like eye troubles and you need to up the font using the accessibility feature on your laptop. Now you might be using 32 pixels on your computer. So now my 1 REM maps to 32 pixels. So my website works perfect with accessibility for other people. Obviously, this is not like an accessibility design workshop, but I just felt the need to clarify that so people know why I'm using REM. Now let's get on with some of this code. So I'm going to make another class called margin effect, and we're going to add a margin left for REM, let's say. And I'm going to get rid of this left up here. Okay, and now we're going to go back to the code, and this margin effect, I'm going to throw it in. So one of the cool things about CSS, again, is that you can actually have multiple classes applied to the same HTML element. Just add a space, list the other name out, and now I have my margin left along with my padding on both the top and the bottom. And you'll notice that the size changed because I changed the number. Now, I'm going to do something here, and this won't make too much sense right now, but it will in just a second. I'm going to take all of this right here, this class, And I'm going to actually delete it from the H1, and I'm going to slap it up on this div right here. So again, I'm going to save. I'm going to refresh. You'll notice basically nothing changes. Again, that's the point. And this is sort of why we like to use divs. And this is an extremely important concept. The reason why we use divs is so that we can apply a class to multiple elements inside of it without having to actually repeatedly write the class word over and over again. So if I want to apply these two classes, and I have like other elements inside of this div, like an H2 tag right below that H1 tag, for example, and it's still inside of the div, this div will form a box around the H1 and the H2, and then apply all of its CSS to both of them. So it's super convenient. It saves you from having to write the class word twice. And if you add any margin or padding, it'll put it on the box around the contents instead of on them themselves. So now we're truly using the box model where our div represents the box and our H1 represents the content inside of it. All right, now let's head back and let's write some more CSS. So now, let's say, for example, that stuff on the left, I probably want to center it. No one likes left-aligned websites nowadays. So let's say center text. And like I showed before, we have this nice little text align property. Not text align last, but just text align. And this, it's just very straightforward, like right, left, center. We're just going to do center right here. And then this center text, I'm going to show you guys some of that div magic, and I'm going to put a div tag right here. And then I'm going to put the div right below, right here. And then on this div itself right here, I'm going to apply that class, and that was called center text. So now if we refresh, you can once again see my name, and now it's centered. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the projects, and you'll actually see how it works when it applies itself to multiple other components. So if I close my div off and I put multiple elements inside of it. So again, a div is an HTML element that contains multiple elements inside of itself. I can actually just put the class like this, and I can do center text. And now we'll see all of that stuff centers at once. I only had to write it once because the div itself is centered, and everything underneath it inherits it. Super convenient. Now back to the CSS. That text in the middle, a little bit too close to everything else, looks kind of ugly. Let's add a class called middle div. Not with those brackets. And what I'm going to do right here, first things first, I'm going to add some background color because I feel like there should be some color on this page. Now here, I'm just going to show a really quick example just for the sake of it, and I'm going to copy this number down. This is E0D1E3. So for those who don't know, this is a hex color code. You can look this up. There are tons of websites where you can play around and like see all of the different ones. There are thousands of these. Basically, it is a 6-digit code with letters or numbers that is mapped to a very specific color. You could list the names out like purple, red, stuff like that, but that only goes so specific. If you want like a very specific shade, hex color codes are the standard way to go. So that's my color. Maybe I also want to kind of space some of that text out. So I'm going to give it a big padding at the top. We'll say like 20 rem. And then we'll do the exact same for the bottom as well. And I'm using padding because I want the background color to be inherited by anything that uses middle div. Also, something that we're going to notice is that when I put on this purple background, we're still going to have black text, which looks kind of ugly. So because I just want a basic color like white, I can just say the word white. It knows what to do. And maybe I also want to make my font a little bit bigger. So even though I'm using an H2 tag, I can still customize it. So I'm going to say font size 24 pixels. Again, you could use rem here. I'm just using pixels for an example that they work interchangeably. But if you were trying to build a real like accessible website, you would use rem. But for a personal website, it does not matter too much. So now this middle div, I'm going to go ahead and apply it alongside with center text right here. So right onto our div in the middle here where we have the hi, I'm Omid. And now you'll see we have this nice big block right here. Looks a lot nicer already. Obviously still not the best, but we're getting there. Now you might notice the small little white margins on the end where the purple does not go the full length of the screen. Not to worry, we'll get to that in a second. But for now, we have this nice purple background that takes up most of the screen. All right, but our projects still look a little bit close, a little bit ugly. We should probably fix that. So I'm going to say projects div, and we'll make something to fix all of that up. So we can actually add some padding top right here. I'll just do 5 rem, keep it simple. Padding bottom as well, in case we ever want to add anything to the bottom, just to be safe. And then I also want to customize the font size here. I'd like to keep things consistent. So I'm going to say font size 24 pixels. So I'll give you guys all a sec to copy that down, and then I'll go and apply it. I have been going a bit fast. I do apologize. All right. I'll come back to this in a second. I also want to show the HTML for anyone who needs to copy that down. So I'm going to copy this projects div name right here, and I'm just going to go throw it right on the div that surrounds the projects. So right along with this center text thing right here, we're going to throw that guy in. And if we refresh, now we got spacing for the projects. Nice and simple, very cool. All right. Now, I'll give everyone a second to copy this down, but we need to solve this issue right here. So we have that little white border on the edge with the purple, not going too great. And there's also another issue too. I don't really like this font. So before we even solve that side issue, I don't like the font. And if I want to change the font, I'd have to go to every H1 tag, or alternatively every div, change the font family variable, make a class for that, and then paste that class onto every div. It's doable, but it's really ugly code, and it's just kind of confusing. Not great to look at. So there's actually another feature that's built into CSS that will make our lives way easier. So we've been writing classes, and we apply those classes to the HTML elements themselves. But you can actually create a CSS class that applies directly to the tag itself. So for example, I can hop over to my CSS right here, and at the very top of my file, I can do this thing that says H2, okay? So now, instead of making a class that I have to apply to the H2 tags, any code inside of these brackets will automatically be applied to any H2 tag that you see. It's essentially a class with no name that will go to any variation of that tag that you see. So I could do this, and I could say H1 font family, H2 font family, still really ugly, still a lot of code, but slightly better and easier to read and understand. But we can actually use that as sort of a hack to make an even prettier looking solution. So this body tag right here, this actually encompasses all of the tags of the content of our page inside of it. So like this div, these H1s, these H2s, right? So I can actually just say body instead of H2 in my CSS. And if I change the font family for body, all of the tags underneath it will also automatically inherit that class. So CSS, like Trishna mentioned, is named Cascading Style Sheets. This is where the name kind of comes in. This is a style sheet, the CSS code, and it's cascading because it's coming down like a waterfall. So I apply something to the body tag, and everything inside of it gets the same effect applied to it, like a waterfall. It slowly comes down. So I can change this to say body, and there's no dot here, just body. And I can say font family, and I like Arial, so I'll do Arial, and I can save this. And now I don't even need to apply anything to my HTML. I can refresh the page, and if you noticed, my font just changed. All right, so this is a pretty cool looking website. I'd say that we've got some pretty cool stuff done here. Now, I'm going to give everyone like another 2-minute break. I'm going to give everyone a chance to copy down this CSS for a minute, then I'll swap back to the HTML. And then we'll go through our very last section. We're going to work on adding a nav bar, some little navigation stuff up there, and then we'll wrap things up. Oh, shoot. Thanks. OK, yeah, I'll go back. I completely forgot about that. Very solid. So, okay, cool. All right, all right. I'm going to call everyone back in here. And I actually forgot something. So before we get to the nav bar, I want to show you guys one more cool thing. My bad. So we're going to come all the way to the very bottom of our CSS right here. And we're going to make one more class. And this is going to get a little bit advanced. If you don't fully grasp this, no worries. This is a bit higher level of a CSS concept. But it's something pretty cool that I feel like can take your personal website to the next level. I'm going to go ahead and create a class called image effects. Okay? And this is going to add an animation to our image that you actually see down here. So right now, hover over it. Two things that you're going to notice. The first, there's no animation. Obviously, nothing's happening. The second thing is if I put my mouse over the image, it doesn't change. So if you guys have ever noticed when you like hover over links, it sometimes changes that like pointy, clicky, like one index finger up. We can actually add that. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and this is not going to make sense when I first type it out, I'm going to say transition transform 0.2s. Okay? Doesn't make sense, don't worry. Whoops. Do not do that. Okay? Now I'm going to say dot image effects again. With no spaces, I'm going to say colon hover. Then I'm going to make my brackets open again. Okay? Yeah, okay. So hopefully everyone's got that down. Now in here, I'm going to say transform scale 1.05. And then I'm going to say cursor pointer. Okay? Now, none of this probably makes sense right now, so let's walk through it slowly, okay? So CSS has this great property called transition. So this thing right here. And this basically means that whenever you hover over wherever this class is applied to, this transition will play. Now, if I just wrote this and I didn't write this hover, literally nothing would happen. You wouldn't even know that this class was applied. But I say transition, something needs to transform, and this is how long the animation should take. So this will be an animation that takes 0.2 seconds to complete, and it's going to be a transformation. There's a few different kinds, so you can feel free to look this up on W3 Schools, but I'm going to use a transformation. Now this thing right here is a hover. So it's saying whenever the Chrome browser, or whatever browser it is that you're using, detects that you are hovering over something that has this class applied to it, run this code, okay? So I define my transform variable as being a scale operation. Now scale is just a fancy word for saying get bigger and get smaller. And 1.05 is my multiplier. So that basically means that when I hover over something, it's going to scale to become 1.05 times bigger than what it normally is. If I just said 1, nothing would happen. If I said 0.95, it would get smaller. Mine is just going to get 5% bigger. And this thing right here has nothing to do with the animation. It just gives you that cool looking cursor so that it becomes a pointer finger. There's a few different things that you can actually customize your cursor to be. Again, if you want to learn about all of them, highly recommend W3 Schools. So now we got to actually apply this guy. So back over to our HTML. Even though there's that hover, you don't actually apply the hover itself. So if I go to my image right here, right before I define my source, you can also do it after, it's fine. I'm going to create my class, and I'm just going to apply image effects. I'm going to also spell it right. It is how I spelled it, right? It is. Okay, cool. So I'm going to say image effects. Again, you're not going to put the hover in this. The hover is implicitly implied, and it comes with image effects when you just type image effects out, okay? Now we're going to refresh right here, and we have an animation. It'll get a little bit bigger, and my cursor will become a pointer. Very cool. And it also automatically does the transformation backwards as well. You don't need to code that in. So when my mouse leaves the image, it gets smaller. Very cool stuff. All right, all right. So let's actually move on to that nav bar, and then we can wrap things up from there. So first things first, inside of this guy right here, this div, creating a nav bar is actually surprisingly difficult. If you're not sure what a nav bar is, I'll come to apple.com really quick, and you'll see it's that thing all the way up there at the very, very top. So you'll notice how it has words like store, Mac, iPad that are all equidistant from each other. Now that looks pretty simple, but that's actually surprisingly complex to code. We're going to try to create something sort of like that, and that alone will just take us about 25-ish lines of code. So this is going to be a pretty heavy operation. If you guys don't follow along with this totally, no worries at all. Again, this code is on GitHub, but just a fair warning, this is going to go a little level up in terms of complexity, but I'll try to go slow. So not all of this will make sense at first, but what I'm going to do is this margin effect right here. If you guys remember, this class right now, it's adding some margin to the left. But this first class is adding some padding to the top and the bottom. And I want to put that just on the H1, not on the div itself. And that'll be clear in a second. But let's move first class down. Let's make that an equal sign. So now first class is applied to the H1. Again, refresh, nothing changes. We're all good. Okay. Now inside of here, I'm going to create a second div. So you can actually nest divs inside of each other. So the same properties that apply to like the outside div apply to this inside div. To the margin effect one will now apply to this one inside of it. Basically like repeating the process, like just nesting them, storing them inside of each other. Everything's still the same. Now for this div, we're going to need some content inside of it. So these will be the actual things inside of our nav bar. So if you guys remember about half an hour ago, Trishna was talking about the A tag. This is what you can use to embed links directly onto your website. So I'm going to make one that says home. And then I'm going to make one that says GitHub. Maybe I want to link to my GitHub if I'm a programmer. Maybe my design portfolio if I'm a designer, whatever. Okay. Now we're going to refresh right here, and a few things are wrong. This does not look anything like Apple's. This looks horrible. So first things first, you actually can't even click on these. Clicking on home in GitHub does nothing. And that's because we haven't completed the A tag. So the A tag takes an argument called href, okay? And this, there's sort of two different things that you can do. So this home, just for the sake of an example, maybe I want it to not link anywhere at all. There are actually some specific use cases for this. You'll learn them if you ever do a tutorial on like interactive scrolling or like making a page that like you click a button and it like scrolls up and down, if you guys have seen those. It uses this sort of functionality where you put this pound sign. So that means that my link will now be clickable. It'll light up. It'll be like underlined when I hover over it. But it's not going to actually take you anywhere. Click it, nothing's going to happen. Now for GitHub, I actually do want to go somewhere. So you have to put an absolute link here. So we are going to do https:// and then I'm just going to do github.com for right now. You can do anywhere that you want, but that's going to do that, okay? I'm going to save. I'm going to refresh, and now you notice the links actually changed color, and they're also underlined now because now your HTML file and Chrome itself knows, hey, this is like a real link. It actually goes somewhere. So this home, you see I click on it, nothing happens, just as intended. If I click on GitHub, it'll actually redirect me and take me directly to my GitHub page. So pretty cool. Now again, we still have the actual styling problem. None of that was fixed. So we're going to go ahead and do two things. I'm going to work a little bit in reverse here, and I'm going to put my class names up first, and we'll kind of work backwards. So the first thing that I'm going to do is put on a class called Nav Links onto this div. So I need a container that I can somehow work to be on the same line as my H1 tag. So like this H1 is on its own line, but then it forces the div down to the next line beneath it. So now I need this Nav Links div to be put back up to the same line. So I'm going to use Nav Links to program that functionality. And these links themselves, they might need styles as well. Maybe I don't like how it defaults to purple. Or I don't like how there's that underline. That looks kind of ugly. So I can actually apply a style here as well, and I'll call this Nav Item. And that's not going to be style, that's going to be class. My bad. Okay. Now again, we haven't written those. Nothing's going to change in your code. But now we sort of have a skeleton template built out. So now we know where to go from here. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is let's build Nav Links. Okay. So we're going to build this guy out. And right here, the first thing that's going to need to happen is I'm going to need to add some margin on this guy. So this guy, he needs some spacing on the right so that he's not all the way up against the right side of the page. And he needs some spacing on the top so that he's not like directly up against the top of the page, say for example. So I'm going to use REM again here. I kind of know these values in advance because I've programmed this out once before. I think you guys can tell. But if you're ever curious about like how I sort of figure out these values, like how I know to just put like 5 or 4, it's typically done just by experimentation. It's very easy to just reload your file after applying the class. So I just put 4 REM, refresh. Oh, that looks ugly. I'll go down to 2, 2.5, 3, 2.75. That's how I get to a weird looking value like that. I just know that that works. Okay. So now we got that guy. And then we also got Nav Item we have to program. So let's put in Nav Item. And this guy right here is going to need a few things. So I don't want my text to be right up against each other like that. So I'm going to need to add some padding between them. I'm going to use 45 pixels for that, okay? I also don't like the color that they are. Don't like that. I want it to be black, okay? Also going to mess with the font size, stuff that we have done before. And then here's a new one. So this guy right here, text decoration. So you guys might see like italicized or underlined text, for example, like inside of your text editor. If you want to do that on your code, text decoration is the one that will do that. So there's a bunch of different things that you can do here. I'm going to actually say none because A tags by default are underlined, and I don't want that. Now, if I did want it to be underlined, I could literally say underlined, but it already is, and I don't want that. So instead, I can say none, and this will override the A tag's default. Okay, that will override the A tag's default, and it will say no underlining. So if I refresh here, we'll see some changes. Now, they're not up on the same line yet, but now my text looks a bit more natural. It says home in GitHub. I can still hover over it, and I can still click on them, but it looks a little bit better from a text perspective. Now, in order to actually get them on the same line, we're going to have to do a slight bit of editing inside of some classes that we've actually already built. Okay? So this margin effect guy, that guy's going away. Actually, I'm going to work inside of first class first. Sorry, guys. So inside of here, these two paddings, they can stay. They can stay. But I also want to add some padding on the left. Okay? Now, there's already padding on the left, but I just deleted that from the margin effect. That was what was adding it before. Now it's gone, so I got to add that back to the first class, okay? And there's a method to this sort of madness. I'm also just going to mess with the font size because I want to while I'm here, okay? So again, I still haven't fixed the problem, but now I have the left spacing that only applies to first class. And remember, we moved first class specifically to the H1 tag that says my name. So now the home in GitHub, you can see that they just move over slightly to the left because they no longer have that left padding. Okay? Now margin effect, this is where the real magic happens. Inside of here, this is our last piece of the puzzle. So I'm going to say with 100%, and I'll explain why in a second. Then I'm going to say display flex. Then I'm going to say justify content, space between. Okay? Oh, space between. Okay? Now, what I just unlocked here is a big can of worms called Flexbox, okay? So when I said display flex, I magically started using this concept called Flexbox, okay? So if I refresh here, you'll notice everything is fixed. Home and GitHub on the same line. You can add as many of these items as you'd like, linking to whatever it is that you would like, and we're good. Now, this display flex, so display is a property that changes in short, like the way that your items are physically displayed. So it enables you, by changing the display, access to certain commands that normally wouldn't do what you want them to do. So that justify content space between would not work the way that we want to without setting display to flex. Now, how does that actually work? So let's kind of walk through it. So that with 100% basically says that the div, that margin effect div, which I had on the HTML right here, so on this entire div class. So now this div takes up the entire width of the page, okay? But I want all of the content in it, instead of it to just go like line after line, I want it to be on the same line. So I say display flex to get it on the same line. But they would be right next to each other, which is not how websites like Apple's normally do things. So if I want them to be spaced apart from each other on opposite ends, I can say space between, okay? And where it's adding that space between is between each element that the div has. So this div has 2 elements. Margin effect has 2 elements. It has this h1 tag, and it has this div. It doesn't know or care about these a tags right here, actually. So these don't mean anything to the margin effect div. All that's actually happening is that margin effect says, okay, I have 2 elements. They are display flex. Put them on the same line. Its container is the full width of the page. He just said justify content space between. So now I move them to opposite ends of the page to give equidistant space between the 2 elements. If I added a third one, you'd see how one goes to the middle, very similar to Apple's site. We won't just for the sake of time, but if you add like 4 or 5 more elements, they will be equidistant all from each other, just like how Apple's website does it. Okay? And again, to kind of go back through the rest of this code, I just moved the padding up to first class so that only my name has the padding, not the home and GitHub. Yes? Yes. Yes. So perfect. So I can actually show you that right now. So for this nav item, that's the class that home and GitHub have. I can do the same hover thing that I did for image effects. So I could say .nav item hover like this. Then I can say text decoration underline, just like that. And I don't need to change my HTML at all. I can refresh. Now it's underlined when I hover. Great question. Oh, if you want to do it like that, that's a little bit more advanced. I won't cover that here with the code, but that is an animation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like I was mentioning, for first class, I just moved the padding back up to that because I want home, GitHub, and my name to all have different padding on them. And then these 2 things down here, Nav Links just affects the container around home and GitHub. So I added some padding to the right side and to the top so that there's some nice spacing. And then the Nav Items themselves, I also gave them some spacing between each other. I changed their color, font size, and I made it so that they're not underlined, but they are underlined when they are hovered over. All right, so that actually just about does it for the code that I was looking to write. I will leave this up here for another few minutes in case anyone wants to copy. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I know it's a bit harder to read, but that way I can sort of get everything that I want into here. I'll scroll down in a sec and I will get to the stuff that we just wrote, and then I'll switch back to the HTML. I'll give everyone about 2 minutes to get all that stuff copied down, and then we will wrap things up here. Yes? Scroll down. All right, here's the rest of the code if anyone wants to copy it as well for the nav items. Yes. Yes, of course. And here's the rest of the HTML if anyone wants to see it as well. All right. Let's get to wrapping things up. Before we get to that, does anyone have any general questions, or is there a specific piece of the code that anyone would like to see at all? Cool. All right, back to the slideshow we go. So those are some of our final touches. So again, that was a rather simple final website. Obviously, it's not like a very professional, like very super heavy one that you might see, but it's a pretty decent starting point, and I highly encourage that everyone tries to build further off of that. We learned a lot of great properties that you can build a pretty complex website with. And obviously the resources that I mentioned so far, like W3 Schools, is a great place to start if you want to keep building. If you're curious about the way that I kind of got into web dev, I literally just watched like a 2-hour-long tutorial, and I like copy pasted the guy's code, and I slowly like just kind of tried to build my own thing, like seeing like what elements did what. Takes a little while, but it's a really great and immersive way to learn. But also feel free to just like use the elements that you learned here today as well. Otherwise, a few more resources in addition to W3 Schools. If you want to find the actual code that we worked on today, that's the link. That will be posted on our social media, probably tomorrow-ish, as well as underneath our YouTube video, which will also probably be posted tomorrow-ish if you want to get access to the actual code itself. You can also just look up HackDavis on GitHub, and you can find the 2022 workshops repository. If you want to know how to actually host your website, so obviously you could go like the very official hosting route that like companies use, but that A, requires money, and B, it's kind of complex. The simplest way that I've ever seen when it comes to hosting a website is that link right there, pages.github.com. If you've never used GitHub before, in very short, it's a place to store your code online basically, and they have a sort of system where you can just upload your HTML and CSS files and just click a few buttons, change a few different settings that they actually walk you through on that page, and it will automatically host your page for you free of charge. The one downside is that it says like .github.com in your URL or something like that, but it's free and it's a great way to just get your actual website hosted up out there. If you also want some more structured HTML, CSS tutorials, like if you're a person who learns from a very structured style format, I would recommend that link, htmldog.com. I personally never use it, but I know a few people who have, and they all give it very high feedback. Also, Flexbox. So I was talking about that. So Flexbox is actually a very dense and long topic. What I showed was just one very, very small snippet. Basically, the reason why we use things like Flexbox, in addition to spacing features that it has like that, is for mobile compatibility. Right now, if you guys make your browser width like super small, you'll notice that the page might get like kind of ugly. And that's because your page is not mobily responsive. And to program in mobile responsiveness is actually rather difficult. And you can use Flexbox to do that, but Flexbox is a bit hard to learn. So I would personally recommend instead using a library called Bootstrap. So Bootstrap was first built by Twitter many years ago. And basically, it's built on top of Flexbox, but it makes it much easier to use. You can feel free to read more on their website if you are interested. That specific feature is called their grid system. They also come with a bunch of other like CSS stuff. Like they come with like nice button styles and stuff. So like when you use the button tag, your buttons will actually look different because it comes pre-downloaded with like a bunch of CSS. You'll notice that some of the stuff that they use is actually very similar to how Twitter looks because Twitter used to look very closely after Bootstrap. And then also, if you want to learn how to make interactive websites, so right now your website is what we call static. Besides that little CSS animation, nothing really changes. If you want to have nice stuff where, say, for example, you click on a link and your page auto-scrolls, or you have like flashy animations, stuff like that, that all is actually done using JavaScript. For anyone who is not aware of what that is, it's a very popular programming language, very in-demand skill right now. It's what pretty much everyone in web development uses alongside their HTML and CSS. If you want to learn more about it and see it applied, you can come to our next workshop. Same time, next week on Thursday, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Justin back there, him and another member of our technical team named Nick, they'll actually be running that one. I'll also be there as well. I was going to say something else about JavaScript. But yeah, really, really great resource. Would highly recommend going to that. JavaScript is very, very cool, and it's super, super awesome. Otherwise, we got that workshop, and then the week after that, if anyone is interested in the basics of design, no experience required, our design team will actually be showing you guys how to prototype stuff using Figma. Otherwise, please follow us on our social medias. You can visit our website at hackdavis.io or at HackDavis on both Facebook and Instagram. Would highly recommend checking us out. We don't flood your feeds, no spam, I promise.